This is the Good Friday and Easter message. This is what I do. This is confrontational. I'm led to be confrontational. It is what it is. If you voted for Biden Harris on this Good Friday and Easter, you've got one of three problems. You either disbelieve the account of Jesus dying on the cross and being raised from the dead. You disbelieve it. Or you believe yet not obey. Your level of commitment you believe is sufficient, and level of commitment runs the gamut for everybody. But if you voted for Biden Harris, we need to talk. Or you, a passive Christian, which is Joe Biden and others, object to the conduct or actions of active Christians, which I consider myself. If you disbelieve the account that Jesus died on the cross and rose from the dead, then you have to disbelieve the account 2,000 years before of Abraham, God telling Abraham, take your son, your only son, Isaac, the son that you love, despite the fact that Ishmael was alive. Ishmael came first. God said, your only son, Isaac, because Ishmael was Abraham's plan. And 13 years later, God implemented his own plan, which was Isaac. Ishmael and all of the children of Keturah and all of the concubines of Abraham are separate from Isaac, Sarah's only child. And Islam, which believes the Old Testament, ignores that fact. Islam is every descendant of Abraham except for Isaac. And God said to Abraham, Isaac, your only son, sacrifice him. Abraham didn't know why, and God stopped him from the sacrifice, but God would refer to sacrificing his only son, the son he loves, 2,000 years later. But you disregard that prophecy foretold 2,000 years before Christ if you don't believe that Jesus died and rose again. You also disregard the Passover, where Israel is in the midst of the exodus from Egypt. God tells them, well, I could snap my fingers and bring you out of Egypt, but I don't do that. You need to sacrifice a lamb. Take the blood of the lamb, put it on your doorpost. You need to be under the blood of the lamb. 1,500 years before Christ, God told Israel to sacrifice a lamb instead of their own sins, sacrificing themselves, because the soul that sinneth must die. Something must die in its place. That's just the way God does things. You disregard that, the Passover, and the institution of the blood of a lamb. You have to disregard God promising, painting himself into a corner, that David and Solomon would have an everlasting kingdom. Well, that's impossible with people. People aren't everlasting. There has to be a direct descendant of David and Solomon to institute an everlasting kingdom. Again, God painted himself into a corner. You have to disregard how Daniel stood in front of Nebuchadnezzar and said, well, after Babylon and Media Persia and Alexander the Great and the Greeks, the two legs of iron, Eastern and Western Roman Empire, iron, the toes and feet are iron mixed with clay. That world order, a revived Roman Empire. The stone, Daniel didn't know what a stone was. The stone is capitalized with an S, signifying deity. The stone, not cut out with human hands, would smash that former world empire. Daniel said that, and remember, Biden-Harris voters, or is it Harris-Biden voters? The Bible is a fairy tale and not credible. It's kind of the Democratic platform. Daniel chapter 2 is a foretelling of the world banding together. That's a bad thing, according to God. It happened in Genesis chapter 11. The entire world banded together in a rebellion against God at the Tower of Babel. God destroyed the Tower of Babel, dispersed people to the four corners of the world, even though Moses didn't know that there were people in Alaska, Argentina, Australian Aborigines, Eskimos, the Inuit, people all over the world. God would prove that to be correct later on. The world banding together is exactly the ulterior motive for the pandemic. Because the coronavirus is not a big deal. It's a glorified flu. But what has to happen has to happen. Therefore, we have a pandemic. You have to disregard Isaiah describing Jesus better than Jesus could have described himself in chapters 52 and 53. I could talk for an hour straight about propitiation. God again painted himself into a corner 700 years before Christ, speaking that somebody would take on your burden that you should have borne, but he would bear it. That's propitiation. Read Isaiah 52 and 53. You have to reject David 950 to 1,000 years before Christ, speaking of every aspect of the crucifixion in Psalm 22, 110, I think 18 and 118. The crucifixion is foretold there. There are over 300 prophecies in the Torah fulfilled by Christ, which Islam conveniently disregards, despite acknowledging the Torah and not referring to the Torah, but its interpretation of the Torah. Anyways, 333 prophecies, not 5 or 10, because it's that big of a deal to God. If you don't believe then that Jesus died and rose from the dead, and there are other arguments, appearing before 500 brethren at one time and no contrary account written. If you don't believe, it's because you choose not to believe. It is what it is for you and me. You choose not to believe. And in America, at least, you can't claim that you didn't know, because I'm telling you, and Billy Graham had told you for the entire 20th century. That's the first. The second is, you believe, okay, you believe, but your commitment, which stops short of mine, and my commitment's not perfect, but I'm doing this for you. Your commitment you think is sufficient. It's your life, right? You can live your life however you want. A lot of people do that. If that's the case, if a lackluster commitment is sufficient and you going about your daily routine is sufficient, you will have, because you believe, you will have to stand before God and explain to him that a minimal commitment was sufficient, while then he explains to you what Christ went through for you, not for him, but you. That's propitiation again. Watch The Passion of the Christ to get an idea of what God voluntarily went through to redeem you. You don't understand it. I don't even understand all of it. But it had to occur for a holy God to be reconciled to a sinful people. Blood sacrifice of a lamb, incurring violence. And it was done for you, and you cannot claim that a minimal commitment comports with Christ's commitment to you. Again, you're warned. The third alternative is you, a passive Christian to whatever degree, object to the conduct or actions of active Christians. A passive Christian, Biden, objecting to the actions of a committed Christian, Trump. For example, you believe CNN when CNN issues a blanket statement that Donald Trump is racist, and they repeat it over and over. Donald Trump is racist. Donald Trump is racist. Why do they do that? Because Donald Trump is in fact a racist? No, CNN has an agenda, which it's hard to believe but a lot of people don't see their agenda. CNN does not state if they are for or against the spreading of the gospel. You have to infer that. They never come out and say one way or the other, but their actions prove, I believe, that CNN's agenda is about as far away from spreading the gospel as can possibly be. It's not just CNN, it's the New York Times, USA Today, CBS, NBC, Facebook, Google, the technocracy, almost exclusively against revival in America, the spreading of the gospel, submission to Jesus Christ, and it's all for an impending world government, all the people together. I'm not going to speak at length about that. That would be for another time. Saying Donald Trump is racist leads people astray. It gives them an out to live their lives the way they want to instead of how God would have them live. And you can't stand before God and say, well, you know what, Donald Trump's a racist and I don't want to be a racist. You need to do your due diligence. God doesn't want you to be like Trump or like any Christian. He wants you to be like Christ. To do that, you have to read it for yourself, not listen to CNN. Read the account of Christ in the Bible for yourself. Everything that CNN does is leading to globalization. People getting together, globalizing, where the United States withers away, whether it collapses or accedes its leadership to a supranational organization. We call that the beast of Revelation 13. It's coming whether you like it or not. It's prophesied that the world will come together, Revelation 11 to 19. We're in the throes of that. That's the plandemic. Gates and Fauci may or may not realize that what they are doing is fulfilling prophecy, that the coronavirus, they think they're helping you with what they do for the coronavirus, about the coronavirus. What they're doing is getting people together under an umbrella, the plandemic, that their agenda, they think they have an agenda to vaccinate people, to keep them safe. Not really. It goes beyond that. Now I'm off key here, but the vaccine, which I said was the mark, well, they're smarter than I am. It isn't the mark. There's no chip in this vaccine. But what about next year? What if the pandemic continues and you need stronger and stronger vaccinations, or you need a registry? That's where the mark is going to come in. But getting back on point, seeing that all this is prophesied about Christ, about what you need to do, confronting Christ in your life, and what is going on right now with the pandemic, you really need to check yourself and decide where you stand with God, if that is sufficient. That is the message of Good Friday and Easter. So again, you're warned.